What's going on? What's going on, brothers and sisters? Welcome to the Lions of Israel Academy, week number 11. Wow, that's amazing. We've been together now for 11 weeks. I want to give all praise, honor, and glory to the Most High God, Yahweh. And I do so in the name of His only begotten Son, Yahweh Shai. I want to say peace and blessings to everybody watching. I do appreciate you guys coming here week in and week out, taking time out of your busy schedule. And as always, I say that I pray that these classes are a blessing to each and every one of you. All right. And I do hope to see a couple of you guys at Passover, Lord allow. Okay. If you guys are coming to Passover, drop a message inside the Telegram chat and let us know. I look forward to seeing some of you guys. All right. So with that being said, without further ado, and so I'm not before you guys too long, let's go ahead and let's get into today's class. So what I'm going to do is, of course, I'm going to remove the banner so it's not in the way of you guys seeing anything that we're doing in the class today. And I'm going to share my screen, and we are going to get started. All right. Oops. Okay. So you guys know that you guys know that I pre-record these classes, and I'm a little low on energy today, but of course the work still must be done. I just finished doing today's Sabbath class. You guys that were in the Sabbath class earlier, when we were talking about the famine of hearing of the word, you guys already know I was doing class for about 2.5 hours, and now I'm back before you to do today's academy for at least an hour or two. So the energy is not that great, but we're going to go ahead and we're going to do what needs to be done, all right? So today's class is called The Original Manuscript Fallacy is a Lie, and I feel like I need to teach this to you guys because this is something that you'll hear people, this is one of their first lines of defense. When they don't believe in the Bible, is to say, well, we don't have an original manuscript of the Bible, so therefore we can't rely on the Bibles that we have today. Well, that is a fallacy. Let's come out for a second and let's come over here and let's look up the word fallacy, because I think it's important that we understand the meaning of words. What is a fallacy? So a fallacy is a mistaken belief, especially one based on an unsound argument. The argument about an original manuscript is unsound. It's an unsound argument, and we're going to see why that is. Let's start with Ephesians 4, verse 14. This is good advice. It says that we henceforth be no more children tossed to and fro and carried about with every wind of doctrine by the sleight of men. So that means trickery. Sleight is trickery. Like in magic, you have the sleight of hand, right? Where the magician will put the rabbit inside the hat and he'll tap the hat a couple of times and turn it upside down and you don't see the hat anymore. Or he'll put something up his sleeve and then pull the sleeve up, it's not there. It's all sleight of hand, right? So it's trickery. It's an optical illusion. It's unsound. It's not real. So we shouldn't be children tossed to and fro with every wind of doctrine, because a lot of these doctrines that people get tossed to and fro with are not real, by the sleight of men, because it's usually by some type of trickery that they even say these doctrines, like to say that there's an original manuscript. That's not real. And I'm going to explain to you guys why. And cunning craftiness, whereby they lie in wait to deceive. So they're always looking for somebody that's open to be tricked, because you don't study, you don't believe, you don't research things. And that's why we're having the academy, so that you can have a sound apology, a sound explanation for why the original manuscript theory is a fallacy. It's not sound, it's not real. 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 3, for the time will come where they will not endure sound doctrine, but after their own lusts, in this case, we're going to say their own beliefs, the things they want to believe, shall they heap to themselves teachers having itching ears, and they shall turn away their ears from hearing the truth, and shall be turned unto fables. And today, the fable that we're talking about is there being an original manuscript. And since we don't have them, therefore the Bibles we have today are unreliable. If somebody was to come to you and say that, or if you were to see somebody saying that online, what would be your sound apology or explanation to explain why that's a fallacy? So people that argue against the Bible have a lot of what are called logical fallacies. So you guys can see I have a list of, in the picture, a list of so-called logical fallacies of people that don't believe in the Bible. You should know what logical fallacies are and why they're important. So one of the logical fallacies that they argue from is the fallacy of composition. It occurs when one argues that something must be true of the whole because true of some parts of the whole. For example, in terms of the fallacy of composition, it is true that the original quote unquote manuscripts of certain books of the Bible we don't have. So therefore, because we don't have the books of those original books of the Bible, therefore the Bible cannot be trusted and the Bible is not original. That's not true. I don't want to go ahead of myself, but that's not true. It seems true, it sounds true, but it's not true. And I'll explain to you guys why as we go on. I don't want to get ahead of myself. The next two common logical fallacies are appeals to authority. What an appeal to authority is that because somebody has a PhD or a doctorate in education, right? They have that title of bishop or minister. They went to seminary school and they have a PhD or a master's degree, whatever you might call it. Therefore, they have to be an expert on a subject, and they have to be right because they have that title. And then someone like you or I who do not have those titles, we don't know what we're talking about. That's called an appeal to authority. You said that because an authority thinks something. So an authority says there has to be an original manuscript. It has to be true. Why is it true? Because that person has doctor at the end of the name or at the beginning of the name. Hello? It has to be true. That's an appeal to authority. That doesn't make something that somebody says right. You also have appeal to common belief. When the claim that most or many people in general or of a particular group accept a belief as true is presented as evidence for the claim. So a lot of people believe Christopher Columbus discovered America, so it has to be true because that's a lot of people believe that. But guess what? We all know that wasn't true. That's the common belief. So when you appeal to a common belief as being true because many people believe it, that's a logical fallacy. Because yes, most people believe Columbus discovered America, but we know that that's wrong, even if the majority of people believe it. Most people believe the white image of Jesus Christ is Jesus Christ, right? The majority of people believe that. We all know that. But guess what? That's not proof that Christ was a white person, because we understand the Bible itself and the earliest images have him being a melanated or brown-skinned person. So we don't care about the common belief. We don't care about that. These are fallacies. A lot of anti-Bible scholarship fall into these two categories. They're not limited to these two categories, but these two are the most popular because somebody with a name and a title says something, and because something is commonly believed to be true. So when it comes to the original manuscript argument, a lot of people, or it's common belief, as well as a lot of authorities, say there should be an original manuscript of the Bible. And a lot of people fall for that. You guys are going to see today that that's not a real thing. And yet another tool of unbelievers is conjecture. Now, these words, if there's going to be a quiz, a lot of these words are going to be on the quiz. Let's go back over them again. So you have the fallacy of composition. You have appeal to authority. You have appeal to common belief. And yet another word here called conjecture. Conjecture is to guess or surmise. So they take what is called an educated guess. An educated guess is not a fact. To surmise is not a fact. So these are tools that people that don't believe in the Bible actually use and superimpose over the scriptures and then come and argue with you or I. So we have to be aware of Satan's devices and be able to give a competent apology or explanation as to why these are logical fallacies and they prove nothing. Now, you know my motto: demonstration and documentation beats conversation. We don't appeal to authority. And we don't want to have a conversation where we're going in circles, circular reasoning. We use demonstration, meaning we show you. That's why we teach in PowerPoints. And we use documentation. We use books and other sources to prove why we believe what we believe. Our apology, our explanation is based on demonstrable information and demonstrable documentation, right? That's what we do. The term original manuscripts is not even academic. It's a pseudo term. Because actually there's a better term that is used in academia to describe the original works of the prophets and the original works of the apostles, and it's not the original manuscript. That's pseudo. The term original manuscripts was created by those who hate the Bible, first and foremost, and lay people, meaning common people, that have used that term ever since. They don't believe in the Bible, so they use the term to weaponize it against you and I. That's not even an academic term, it's fake. Question. In the KJV without the Apocrypha, how many writers were there? And what is the timeline of these writings? That's the question. The answer is there is, according to what some research has yielded, there's about 40 authors who wrote the Bible over a period of about 1,500 years. So right here, we could really stop the presentation right here. How can you have an original manuscript of the Bible if there are 40 different people who contributed to the Bible over 1,500 years? That means that it was constantly, the records were constantly being added to. So how can there be one original? It doesn't make any sense. It's not logical. It's a fake term. That's why the term is pseudo. You have people like Jeremiah who autographed several books in the Bible, right? Jeremiah autographed Jeremiah, the book of Jeremiah itself. He also authored Lamentations, right? You have Solomon who wrote Songs of Solomon, right? Solomon who wrote Proverbs, right? He wrote multiple books in the Bible. He also wrote Wisdom of Solomon as well in the Apocrypha, right? So you have people that authored multiple books, right? You have a succession of different prophets that were in different time periods prophesying concerning things that were going to befall Israel throughout different time periods. So there was constantly additions to our records being made. So how can you have one original manuscript? You can't, because the book is being compiled over a long period of time. That's a fake argument. And here's a list of exactly what I was talking about. So you have Amos, Daniel, you have David, right, who wrote portions of Psalms. You have Ezra, right? Look at Jeremiah. Jeremiah's credited with writing 1st and 2nd Kings, Lamentations, and Jeremiah. You have Samuel. Samuel's is attributed with 1st and 2nd Samuel. Ruth and Judges. Solomon, Ecclesiastes, Proverbs, and Songs of Solomon, right? So you have different people at different time periods contributing to the Bible. How can you have an original manuscript? You can't. Original Bible, I should say. You can't, because people will ask that. Where's the original Bible? It's a stupid question. And you have the same thing with the New Testament as well. Different people writing at different times, contributing to the overall book through different time periods. So what is the academic word that should be used for this collection of books? The academic word that should be used in biblical terminology is autographs, right? Like when somebody writes an autobiography, that's you writing about yourself. You wrote that. It's an autograph. In biblical terminology, the autographs refer to the original documents of several books of the Bible. So what should be properly said by people, since they want to be technical and speak against the Bible, is we don't have the original autographs of many of the books of the Bible. We don't. That's a fair assessment. So when somebody says something that's fair, we can't be disingenuous. Even though we're Bible believers, we cannot be disingenuous. We have to be honest. So the honest truth is that we are not in possession of the autographs of certain books of the Bible, many of the books of the Bible, meaning written by the prophets themselves and written by the apostles. Now, that's nothing for you guys to worry about. I'm going to show you that's the way transmission of works works. Transmission meaning that stuff that's passed down from generation to generation. That's the way it works. This is not just true of the Bible. It's also true of the regions and countries that surround the Bible. The regions and countries that interacted with the Bible, like Egypt, they got the same problem. They don't have autographs of many of their works either. So that's okay. And I'm going to explain to you guys why we don't have the autographs. It all makes sense. Second bullet point, when Paul, for instance, wrote the letter to Rome, to the Romans, right, to Tertius, and handed it to Phoebe to carry it to Rome, the result was the autograph of the Epistle of Romans. So Paul wrote the letter, gave it to Phoebe, and Phoebe passed the letter on to Tertius in Rome. All such original writings, notice it doesn't use the word original manuscripts, all such original writings have perished. Nobody knows what happens to them. I'm going to prove that to be a lie. We do know what happened to them. All you got to do is use common sense. We have insight based on the material that was used. That's the answer right there. The answer right there is the reason why the autographs have not survived and why we don't have them today is because of the material that was used. That's why you cannot have the autographs today. That's why it's a disingenuous argument, because of the material that was used. Some still may exist in fragments. We may have fragments of the autographs, the original writings of the apostles and prophets, but we don't have them in their entirety because of the way that they were, or the materials that was used. Bullet point number 4 right here. The copies made from them, meaning the autographs, known as manuscripts or apographs, though highly accurate, reflect to a very high degree the original message given by inspiration, so that the faithful need not despair or abandon the concept of Bible infallibility. So we don't have the autographs, but we have the apographs, which means the copies that were made, because there were scribes. That was a profession in ancient Israel. It was a profession in ancient Egypt. And I'm going to kind of go ahead of myself. The autographs of the original Bible or original works were written on papyrus. Papyrus is highly known to wear out after a lot of use. So you cannot just have the autograph and that's where you stop. If what is being said, you want it to be preserved to future generations, brothers and sisters, you got to make copies. Just like when you guys read, I don't know, Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, Shakespeare's Othello. We're not reading the original that Shakespeare wrote, but it was a classic work that was meant to go throughout all generations. So after the original was written, after Shakespeare's death, what did they do, brothers and sisters? Say it with me. They created apographs, meaning copies. Because eventually the original, it was written on paper, right? Paper only lasts for so long. You guys have a Bible. You constantly turning through your Bible for precepts, marking up your Bible, underlining things, highlighting things. After a couple of years, what happens to your Bible, brothers and sisters? The spine becomes unstable. The pages start falling out, right? It stops being reliable. Now you got to go do what? You got to get a new copy of the Bible. If you could understand that, you could understand why we have apographs and not autographs. Because the autographs or the original writings were on papyrus, which is not reliable. It doesn't age very well. So once the autograph was written, the original writings, now you had to have apographs made, which was copies. And then you have to have copies made of copies. And that's how the writing is preserved and transmitted down through the generations. Is everybody understanding? It's a disingenuous argument to expect that the autographs, which were written on papyrus, which doesn't age well, to still exist. It's stupid. We don't expect that of Romeo and Juliet. We don't expect that of Plato or Shakespeare or Socrates. We don't expect their original writings to still be here. We know that if we read about them today, we're reading copies. But for some reason, as soon as we start talking about the Bible, we start talking stupid. Not us, but the people that hate the Bible. They start talking stupid. So I went to look up what an apograph is. An apograph refers to an established copy of transcripts, copies of transcripts of certain texts used religiously or ecclesiastical, rather than the original autographs by the original writers or authors. So translation, we have apographs of the original autographs because it makes sense, because the original autographs were written on materials that don't age very well, such as papyrus. That's it. So that takes your original manuscript argument and it flushes it down the toilet. It's a stupid argument, but it's one that people use to try to speak against the Bible. But now we understand it's a dumb argument to begin with. So it's nothing for us to worry about. It's very easy to explain. Now let's watch this video called The History of Writing. Let's go.
People have been writing for thousands of years, but have you ever wondered who wrote the first things down? The people of Uruk, a city near the Euphrates River in southern Iraq, began to use the world's first system of writing around 3200 BCE. This system is called cuneiform, and they wrote by using a reed stylus to press symbols into wet clay tablets.
Now, I want you guys to understand something. Let's go back just slightly, right? So you had something called cuneiform. And cuneiform is a way of, you take a reed and you write into clay tablets, right? So these things are a lot more, what's the word I'm using for? They age better than what the Bible was written on, because it's clays, can harden. It can be almost like stone, so it can be preserved for a long time. So a lot of these writings still exist today. They found a lot of them because it's much more durable and it ages better. I just wanted to say that. Let's go.
Tablets. This was many years before the time of Abraham, who is said to be from nearby Ur of the Chaldeans. The Sumerians developed cuneiform into a full writing system by about 2600 BCE. This new technology quickly spread across the Near East. All major Mesopotamian civilizations used it. If Abraham and other biblical patriarchs wrote, they might have used this method, or hieratic, Egypt's writing system. The first written characters were stylized pictures, called pictographs, which represented concrete objects. People used these to keep records of economic transactions and inventories of barley, livestock, laborers, and more. Eventually, the system of pictographs couldn't keep up with what people wanted to communicate. They wanted to record more complex or abstract ideas, so early scribes had to think about ways to record speech itself, rather than objects. Scribes began to write individual syllables that made up words, which meant they could write any word in any language. This expanding system helped them write religious songs, epic literature, educational texts, and personal letters. Around 1500 years later, those syllables would be further shortened to just the first letter, creating the alphabet. These Near Eastern clay tablets are extremely durable, so we have nearly 500,000 tablets and fragments today.
They have 500,000 of these today. They stood the test of time, and these things were written before the Bible was even being transcribed. And they have 500,000 of these still today because these things were written on clay tablets, which are very durable. That makes sense.
That give us a glimpse of nearly every aspect of ancient life in Mesopotamia. These documents span more than 3,000 years of human history and show how we are indebted to these ancient people in many ways we might not realize.
Okay. Let's go to the next video. Now we're going to talk about the next form of material that was used to preserve writings, and that's papyrus. What is papyrus and why does it matter? Let's turn the video all the way up.
Can papyrus grow tall where there is no marsh? Can reeds thrive without water? Papyrus appears a number of times in the Bible, as in this passage from the book of Job. In Exodus, the mother of baby Moses places him in a papyrus basket to save his life, and Job compares his days to swift-passing boats of papyrus. But papyrus' most important role in the history of the Bible is as material on which the biblical text was written.
So now we learned something. The biblical text was originally written on papyrus, right? Listen.
Papyrus was the paper of the ancient world, made from long, thin strips of the papyrus reed. These strips of reed were overlaid in crisscrossing layers. When pressed together, the gum from the plant's cellular structure acted as a bonding agent. Multiple sheets of papyrus were joined into scrolls that could be over 100 feet.
Now, what you guys are looking at, right, this is the Museum of the Bible. So there's certain manuscripts of the Bible that are preserved today, especially from the New Testament era, that come out of Egypt called the Alexandrian manuscripts. And they were written on papyrus, and you guys are actually looking at that. Let's go back just a little bit so you guys can see that. As the camera pans, that's what you guys are looking at.
Multiple sheets of papyrus were joined into scrolls that could be over 100 feet long. Papyrus was also used to make a codex, or sheets bound together like a modern book. As you view papyrus exhibits, notice the direction of the fibers. The side of the papyrus consisting of the horizontal strips was favored by scribes, as it provided a natural equivalent.
Now, I don't expect you guys to know this, but if you're looking at this papyrus right here, the writing on there is Greek. That's not Paleo-Hebrew. That's not Assyrian Hebrew. That's Greek. So that's a more modern. These manuscripts, like I said, come out of Egypt during the time when the Greeks were ruling, right? And the Romans eventually. This is where these papyrus come from. The papyruses that come from the ancient times, talking about when the Israelites were in Egypt, and even when we had left Egypt and went into the land of Canaan, those papyruses, we don't have access to them today. Because the papyrus plant, if not preserved properly, doesn't age very well. I just want to say that. Let's go back a little bit because I don't want to break the thoughts.
Codex, or sheets bound together like a modern book. As you view papyrus exhibits, notice the direction of the fibers. The side of the papyrus consisting of the horizontal strips was favored by scribes, as it provided a natural equivalent of lined paper. The backside was less conducive to writing, as it required writing across the vertical fibers. By observing the direction of the fibers, you should be able to determine at a glance the front and back of each fragment. Eventually, papyrus was largely replaced by parchment, but for many years, it was the way the Bible was passed down through generations.
So what happened was papyrus was the first popular, after the cuneiform tablets kind of went by the wayside. And it went by the wayside because Egypt became a world power. So, of course, Egypt is known for the papyrus reed plants. So that became then Not that it was a better way of, writing things down, but because they obviously were the place where the reed plants were, they wanted to be the place where everybody had to come to get material that's used to write things down. Is everybody following along? That goes back to what I showed you guys just a few minutes ago about the autographs versus the apographs. We understand why the autographs don't exist anymore. It's because of the material that was used. When the Egyptians became a world power, they went away from using the clay papyrus tablets and everything, and they began to the clay tablets, and they began to use papyrus. Now, the Egyptians are also known for creating stone monuments as well. We know that a lot of things are inscribed on the pyramids. A lot of things are inscribed on steles. So things are inscribed in stone still. They didn't completely do away with it, but papyrus became very, very popular. And because papyrus became very, very popular, what you guys are going to find out is even a lot of Egyptian history also, we don't have autographs for it. We just have manuscripts from way later in Egypt, hundreds, if not thousands of years later, because we don't have the autographs of Egyptian history either. The ones that were written on papyrus. We only have copies. For the same reason. That's why I said it's not a strike against the Bible. That's just the way the ancient world worked. It's okay. Some of the famous Bible papyruses, you have the Chester Beatty papyri. You have the Bodmer papyri, the Ryland papyri, Oxyrhynchus papyri, Magdalene papyrus. Hopefully I said those right. And we can research how these papyruses are being preserved. These papyri are fragmented. What does it mean fragmented? Meaning that they were preserved, but there's pieces of these papyruses that are missing that did wind up decaying away. But they were preserved, and so we have some of it, so we can kind of decipher some of what was going on, but not all. Because they were not well preserved, which lends to our argument that multiple copies are needed when these materials are used. So you might ask yourself, if these papyruses are fragmented, then how do we know the whole history? Because we have so many of them. They're all fragmented in different places. So you have to put them all together. That's how you see the whole picture. So if you have 10 scribes writing down these stories, right? Scribe number 1, maybe the bottom right-hand corner fragments, but the rest of it is good. Scribe number 2, the bottom right-hand corner is still there, but the top right-hand corner fragmented, right? Person number 3, the left-hand top part fragments, right? Person number 4, the left hand is still there, but the right bottom part is gone. You guys get the idea. So they line these things up together, and that's how they see the whole picture. That's why we have scribes making so many copies, because the papyrus is not reliable. It doesn't age very well. That's the point. Here's how the Chester Beatty papyrus actually looks, so you guys can see. Look how decayed it is, especially right here. Before I start playing it, look how much of this is missing. Look how much of this one is missing. So they have to line the Chester Beatty papyrus up with the rest of them. That's how they see the whole picture. That's why the Spirit of the Most High moved to make sure that there was multiple copies being written. That's why there was a whole profession of scribes. Imagine if you only had the autograph. Imagine if this is all we have. We'd be missing stuff. They're on display at the museum.
Chester Beatty texts are actually the New Testament, all 4 Gospels together, which is interesting because that is earlier than let's say we're talking 200, AD 200 to 250. That's actually earlier than it had been thought that the Gospels had all been put together in the canonical form that we now accept, and they're written in books.
So let me explain. Let me go back a little bit, right? So these papyruses, these copies date to about 200 to 250 AD, and they come out of Egypt, and they're written in Greek. So without getting too deep into the weeds of history, you had a lot of different periods in time where once the Bible writers like John the Revelator, let's say, once he's done with his writings, right? Once Paul is done writing his letters to these churches, that information has to circulate amongst all the churches. Like everybody needs to read these letters, right? So you have the scribes making copies for hundreds of years, but it was never one complete book. For instance, let's just use hypothetically the church in Corinth. In their day and time when Paul wrote them their letter, they would not have had a copy of all the epistles. The church at Rome would not have had a copy of Corinthians and Colossians. No, that didn't. You don't start getting the entire manuscript together until they start having these councils, and they go out and they get all the different books and they put them together into one. This happens later. That's how you get a Bible. Once the autographs were written, the original writings, the scribes started making copies. And then after the copies were made by the scribes, you begin to start getting what's called a canon, where all the different books were put together into one. Is everybody getting it? And that was circulated. So that's what he's talking about. It was the copies of the original that were put together in an autograph and were circulated into what's today we call the Bible. And that is okay, because as I'm going to show you guys, or as I showed you guys already, Egypt has the same problem, because they're the ones that chose papyrus as the place to write stuff. They got the same problem. What we know about Egypt today comes from copies and books that were put together later in Egyptian history, not the original autographs. Anyway.
It's 250. That's actually earlier than it had been thought that the Gospels had all been put together in the canonical form that we now accept. And they're written in book form. That is, one page after another, rather than on a roll. Papyrus is made from the Papyrus plant of Cyprus. It grew in Egypt in the ancient world, particularly in the delta where the Nile branches out.
Look how fragmented that is.
Stem, and when you take off the hard outer layer, you can then peel away strips of this pithy, sticky stuff. And they
look how fragmented that is.
Side and then crossways, flattened, dried, and then you could rub them smooth into very high quality writing paper, actually. Written on this surface, it's pretty well immortal, maybe claiming too much, but it survives really well if it's kept dry. And
that's the key. At the time that we were writing these records down, he has the perspective of history, and to a degree, the perspective of science, particularly paleontology and other forms of science, right? To understand how the papyruses could have been preserved. But at the time that they were actually writing on these papyruses, both the Egyptians and us, we didn't know that. Papyrus will only age well if it's kept in the dry place and in the dark. Well, when the Most High had the prophets and everything writing stuff down, the idea was not for these writings to be kept in the dark. The idea was them to be used in the light, right? The Levites had to have a copy of the law in order to execute the law, to execute judgment. They had to have copies of it. The Levites were in every town, in the suburbs, in every tribe in Israel. And they would have to have a copy of the law to execute their job. And their job was not done in a dry, dark place, right? It was done in the light. Let's be real. So those papyruses are not going to last long. You got to have copies.
In the dark. Seeing the beginning of this movement is really quite dramatic. I mean, we're looking at really some of the
look how fragmented that is. Look at this one on the left.
Concerned about well, it was the word and not lovely pictures and gorgeous illustrations. None of that. Just beautifully written words. Whether you're religious or not, I think it's still really interesting to see and be in the presence of some of the earliest texts of the earliest Christians. You're taken back to the 2nd or early 3rd century AD, and these were the works they took out and read to each other and learnt, sometimes learnt off by heart.
So they were available for review up until April, whatever year this was, and then they had to put those joints back in a dry, dark place, or else they're gonna fragment more. You only can keep them out. And by the way, we're gonna go into these things that they have them in. It just looks like a normal frame to you guys, but it's not a normal frame. There's a lot going on underneath that glass. I'm going to show you guys that. There's a lot going on under there. Technology that the prophets of them didn't have, which is why those autographs that they wrote don't exist today. All right. So we started off with clay tablets during the time of the Mesopotamians. Then we graduated when Egypt became a world power. We moved over to papyrus, which we learned doesn't age very well. And we saw examples of papyruses from the 2nd and 3rd century that are highly fragmented. That's why the Most High made it so there were so many copies. So they're not all fragmented in the same place. So you're able to put them all side by side and get the whole picture. So that was the Most High and his infinite wisdom doing that. Okay. Now, what is parchment and why does it matter? Let's go.
The history of the Bible is tied to the history of technology. As new technologies of communication and transportation emerged, they accelerated the spread of the Bible around the globe.
Now, I don't agree with what she just said. I'm going to tell you why. As she's going to show you in the video, it wasn't new technology. Like parchment is not necessarily new technology. Parchment comes on a skin, which, by the way, parchment is animal skin. Parchment becomes the popular way to write things down and replaces papyrus because Egypt was no longer a world power. You had other world powers that rose up instead. So what did they do? They pushed their style of writing things down as the new way, as opposed to what Egypt is doing, so they can proliferate and make money off of their style. It wasn't really new technology per se. It's different technology if you want to say it that way. But it wasn't more advanced or anything like that. No, it was just a powerful kingdom that rose up and said, this is the way we're going to do things now.
The history of the Bible is tied to the history of technology. As new technologies of communication and transportation emerged, they accelerated the spread of the Bible around the globe. But we're not talking about technology in terms of bytes and tweets. This technology was something much more basic. Parchment. Parchment is a form of animal skin that is treated and used as a writing surface. And according to the ancient historian Pliny the Elder, the invention of parchment springs from a conflict between two kingdoms. In about 190 BC, Eumenes II, king of Pergamum in modern-day Turkey, was assembling a magnificent library. Ptolemy V, king of Egypt, feared it might surpass his own legendary library in Alexandria. But Ptolemy possessed one distinct advantage. Manuscripts at the time were written primarily on papyrus, which was made from a type of reed that grew along the Nile River. The Lord of the Nile was the Lord of papyrus. So Ptolemy blocked the trade of papyrus so no library could rival his own. King Eumenes was forced to innovate. Some had begun to use animal skins as writing surfaces. So craftsmen in Pergamum perfected the practice and filled his library with parchment manuscripts.
So it wasn't about new technology, really. Like she said earlier in the video, it was just simply somebody trying to go around Egypt, which was ruled at the time by the Greeks, but go around them and build their own library and do what they wanted to do. And so they went around Egypt. That's how that happened.
Parchment, it turns out, is much more durable than papyrus and easier to bind into books. Parchment, bound into a codex, became the medium by which many ancient biblical texts were passed down and survived through the ages.
So now we learn that a lot of the later writings of the Bible, after Egypt was no longer a world power, switched from being written on papyrus to being written on parchment instead. Now, parchment is more durable than papyrus, but it's still not that durable. It's still not that durable. Let's look at 2 Timothy chapter. Let me come in and fix the way that this is presented. I don't like the way this is presented. All right. Make it look a little better. You know, we build it while we fly, guys. You already know. So let me just present that a little bit better. So this is 2 Timothy 4, verse 13. This is Paul speaking to Timothy. He says, the cloak that I left at Troas with Carpus, when thou comest, bring with thee, and the books. So Paul left books there, but especially the parchments. So Paul was writing things down. What were these parchments? I don't know. Could they have eventually become some of the epistles that we read today? Possibly. I don't know. It doesn't say. But what this is showing you is that during the time of the Apostle Paul, during the time of the Romans, they were writing things down on parchment, which is animal skin. So papyrus was no longer the top way of transcribing or writing things. All right. Now, this is very important because I want you guys to look at this. I want you guys to see the great lengths that you have to go to in order to preserve parchment. Brothers and sisters, one of the most famous documents, which is the Declaration of Independence, was actually written on parchment. And I want you guys to look at the science that they have to enact in order to preserve it. The reason why we don't have the original autographed parchments that Paul wrote, that John may have written on the book of Revelation, so forth and so on. The reason why we don't have the autographs is because those guys didn't have this technology. This type of science didn't exist then. The science that did exist in their day was to have scribes make copies because you knew your parchment wasn't going to last but for so long. Now we live in the age of technology where a document that's only 1776, 1876, 1976, 2076. So we're talking about maybe a document that's only 250 years old. Way younger than the parchments that the apostles and stuff would have wrote their stuff on. I want you guys to look at the science of how they preserve this thing. It's crazy.
How is the Declaration of Independence protected from the elements, billions of visitors, and most of all, time? The National Archives and Records Administration uses physics, chemistry, and technology to keep one of our nation's most important historic documents safe.
Physics and technology. Physics and technology to keep the Declaration of Independence safe. It's only 250 years old.
A special encasement designed by the National Institute of Standards and Technology uses aluminum and titanium to isolate the Declaration of Independence from the outside environment. The frame and base were machined from solid blocks of metal to minimize the risk of leaks, and a seal made of tin and a nickel alloy keeps air out. A double-layered piece of tempered glass with an anti-reflective coating is suspended over the document. It's not bulletproof, sorry Nick Cage, but it is strong enough to withstand changes in temperature and barometric pressure. The document sits on a sheet of cellulose paper, which helps regulate humidity, and an aluminum platform precisely cut to fit the parchment's irregular edges so it's invisible to visitors. Parchment, which is made from animal skin, is sensitive to air pollution and changes in humidity, so the air inside the case is inert argon gas at a relative humidity of 40%.
Y'all see all they have to go
Argon
through?
won't react with the parchment, and its atoms are too large to escape through glass, unlike helium, which was used in an older case. If the humidity is too low, the parchment can crack, or ink can flake off. But if it's too humid, collagen in the animal skin can turn to gelatin. To monitor the conditions inside the case, archivists use a tool called an absorption spectrometer. A beam of light shines into the case through a small sapphire window. It's reflected by a series of mirrors under the platform to a sensor behind another sapphire window. This system can detect changes in humidity or the gas composition. Modifications can be made to run other tests. The case is so airtight the NIST estimates it will be 100 years or more before the oxygen concentration in the case reaches 0.5%. The origin of Americans' life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness will be secure for many more Independence Days, thanks to science. For Scientific American, I'm Tim Palmieri.
So did you guys see all the science that they have to use in order to preserve something that was written on parchment only 200 and let's say 50 years ago? Now do you guys understand why the parchments that the original autographs of the people of the Bible were writing on don't exist? Because this technology didn't exist, and they didn't know that. And they weren't writing these things down for them to sit in a dark place somewhere under a glass with an absorption spectrometer. It was written to be used. So they had the good sense to make copies. Y'all bear with me 1 second. There's a couple of slides I got to get out of here. Get that out of here. This one also. Okay. Let's check this out real quick. A short video on papyrus conservation.
This is a papyrus book of the dead, which will be on display in the
So I want to stop right there because I want to show you guys something. This is very important. Pay attention. This is the Egyptian Peret Emheru. I know a lot of y'all don't know what that is. Peret Emheru is the book of coming forth by day. That's how you say it in the ancient Egyptian language. It's the Peret Emheru, which is the book of coming forth by day. Right? We call it in modern times the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Remember, I told you guys that we saw the Bible manuscripts in the Museum of the Bible that were written in Greek, the Chester Beatty Papyrus. We saw that was fragmented. Now we're looking at an Egyptian document, their own documents. You guys are going to see the same thing. It's fragmented as hell. They have the same problem we have. You cannot let these people play in our faces. They come to you and tell you, you don't have an original manuscript of the Bible. You don't have an original manuscript of the Book of the Dead either. What you guys are reading today is copies that were written down by scribes. The autographed copies were fragmented because they were written on papyrus. It's right here in front of us. Let's go back.
This is a papyrus book of the dead, which will be on display in the exhibition Journey Through the Afterlife, Ancient Egyptian Book of the Dead. Before it goes on display, the old Victorian paper backing needs to be removed. So Bridget places the papyrus in a fume hood and applies strips of paper to protect the front. The papyrus is face down and wetted on the table, with tracing paper mapping the delicate areas of the papyrus at hand. Both conservators peel off the top backings. The last backing needs to be picked off with tweezers. The back of the paper coming off is brown because it previously was painted to blend in with the papyrus. Whilst the conservators continue to take off the backing, they ensure the papyrus is moist by spraying water on it. Picking off the backing took over 2 hours.
What are you guys seeing about the papyrus as they take the paper off? You guys see all these? Wait.
Because it papyrus, the backing. They ensured it was moist by spraying water on it. Picking off the backing took over 2 hours.
So what are you guys seeing? My bad for that. What are you guys seeing as they take the thing off? You guys seeing all the holes in it? That's fragmentation. If that was the original manuscript, hypothetically, of the Egyptian Book of the Dead, there'll be portions of the story that's missing. The reason why they're able to make copies today is because people made more than one copy. That's the way ancient manuscripts worked. There was no such thing as an original manuscript. That's just something fake that they superimpose over the Bible to argue with you and I. That's it. Well, you don't have the original. That wasn't the way people worked in the ancient world. They understood they were writing on papyrus and parchment. So the original wasn't important. What was important was that the scribes would carefully make copies so that it could be preserved and transmitted down through generations. That was what was important.
Hours. So, to save you time, we sped up the process.
And there you have it. Look how fragmented that is.
Once the old backing is removed, a fine, high-quality lining is put on to support it. The newly lined papyrus is dried between blotting paper under glass and weights and lies there for several weeks. When Helen and Bridget are confident the newly lined papyrus has dried, They remove the facing that was put on to provide temporary protection. Once this is done, they examine the result and are pleased with the new lining on the papyrus. They will soon get going with the rest of the conservation work that is needed on the papyri featuring in the next major exhibition.
So we're learning together how the ancient world worked, how the ancient autographs worked, what they were written on, and how these traditions were passed down through generations, was passed down through scribes that had to keep making copies. That's it. So the Bible is in the same company as these things. It's not a big deal. Now, there was a finding, many of you guys know or heard of what's called the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls were also written on parchment. And in the ancient world at the time, they put these parchments in jars. That was their way of preserving it. So it's not the scientific way that they do it today, which is way more intricate, but it was their way of also preserving writings as well. It's very important, right? That's why we have almost the complete book of Isaiah from the Dead Sea Scrolls, and it matches the Bible that we have today to prove that that what we have today in English, all the way down through the different translations into English, is accurate, because what they found on those parchments in the Qumran caves matches what we have in our Bible today. So the transmission process was successful throughout the generations. Let's watch a little bit of this video.
In spring 2018, I had the opportunity to visit Qumran, a small ancient settlement on the coast of the Dead Sea. Qumran is most famous as the site where the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, a huge collection of Jewish texts from the Second Temple period, and one of the most important archaeological discoveries for scholars of the Bible and ancient Judaism in general. What you're seeing here is footage I took on a visit to the Dead Sea Scrolls lab at the Israel Museum, as well as my exploration of Qumran itself. But what is the connection between this site and the scrolls themselves? You may have heard the story of the Dead Sea Scrolls discovery. In 1946, a few Bedouin shepherds stumble upon a cave full of scrolls. Some are biblical texts, like the Great Isaiah Scroll, and some are previously unknown, like the War Scroll, a sectarian text that describes an apocalyptic battle at the end of time. But you might not know what happened next. Archaeologists and Bedouins swooped in and discovered more caves and more scrolls. In all, 11 caves were discovered with scroll fragments adding up to approximately 900 different scrolls. What you're looking at here is Cave 4, easily visible from the site, and by far the cave that yielded the most evidence, thousands of tiny fragments that added up to at least 500 different scrolls. Although we usually think about the famous scrolls that were nearly intact, most of these 900 scrolls were small fragments, like what you're seeing here at my visit to the Dead Sea Scrolls lab. Imagine the...
Right, because putting them in jars, and you guys can look at the tables, all these things are fragmented. The book of Isaiah was one of the few scrolls that was not fragmented. All these things are fragmented because putting it in jars is not really the right way to preserve it. They were trying, but it's not the right way.
Crazy jigsaw puzzle it was for scholars to try to piece these together and identify which fragments go with which scroll. Now, some archaeologists have suggested that Qumran was simply a villa or a workshop, but most agree that whoever lived at Qumran were probably the ones who composed most of the scrolls and eventually hid them in these caves. Although no scrolls were found in the settlement itself, the same pottery type that the scrolls were stored in have been found there. Moreover, one of the rooms discovered had long mud brick tables and benches along with inkwells mixed in with the artifacts, which is a rare find in the archaeology of this region. So archaeologists have interpreted this as a specialized writing room where the inhabitants may have composed the scrolls. But who were these people? Taken as a whole, the archaeology of Qumran suggests that they were a sectarian Jewish community, purposely living an ascetic lifestyle in a tight-knit, self-sustaining settlement out in the desert, away from the bustle of cities like Jerusalem or Jericho. The settlement itself is not that fancy. Simple buildings built out of rough-cut stones.
So you guys get the idea. If you want to learn more about the Qumran caves, you guys can do research on your own. But again, they found a lot of scrolls in this area, and the book of Isaiah was found almost completely intact, and it matches the Isaiah that we have today. So letting you know that the copies and the copies and the copies and the copies that were made were accurate. That's the thing.
In spring...
Who is Sir Flinders Petrie? I know I spoke about him in the academy before. I may have spoken about him in a regular class as well. I don't remember. But Sir Flinders Petrie is one of the most famous Egyptologists of all time who made valuable contributions to the techniques and methods of excavation, meaning digging things up, ancient histories, especially Egypt. And Egypt plays an important role because A, yes, we were in captivity in Egypt, but also B, because we use an export of Egypt, which is papyrus, to write many of our writings on early on. So it's very important. So this is what Sir Flinders Petrie said concerning Egypt and their writings. I always quote this. This is from a book called The Pyramid Age by Emmett Sweeney. We're on page number 75, and this is what Sir Flinders Petrie said concerning Egypt. He said, "Such then is the scientific basis for Egyptian chronology." Chronology means time. How do you go throughout the time of Egypt and explain the time of Egypt and the history of Egypt and what happened in Egypt, so forth and so on? How do you explain the Egyptian chronology? A chronology which, as early as 1961, was described as little more than a collection of rags and tatters. That's the way that Sir Flinders Petrie described Egyptian history. A collection of rags and tatters. Why? Because the further back that you go into Egyptian history, the papyruses are fragmented and you don't really know much about that time period. What happens is later on, when the Greeks come into power during the time of Herodotus and Manetho, based on the evidence that was available during their time, as well as speaking with a lot of the Egyptian priests, et cetera, they did their best to reconstruct a lot of Egyptian history. They weren't eyewitnesses to it. There wasn't papyruses and everything that tells you everything that happened. It's sort of a reconstruction of Egyptian history through Manetho and Herodotus. And that's what passes off as much of Egyptian history today. It was retold to us by the Greeks. That's why if you were in class earlier yesterday, I did the class today, but you guys will be watching this tomorrow. If you were in a class yesterday, I spoke about the quote from Napoleon Bonaparte that says, "History is a set of lies agreed upon." Some of what passes off as ancient Egyptian history is a retelling of the history by the Greeks hundreds, if not thousands of years later, because the actual papyruses and everything didn't exist. They were gone for whatever reason. So when you see somebody with a daggone ankh calling themselves Kemetic, saying that they're Egyptian, mocking the Bible about an original manuscript, you have to laugh at them. Really, you should feel sorry for them. That tells you they don't know history. They have the same problem. It's not really a problem because you understand that's just the way that, when I say they have the same problem, it's not really a problem. That's just the way the ancient world worked. That's why the scribal class existed, both in Egypt and in our culture and in other cultures as well. That's why it existed. The Persians had that. The Romans had scribes. The Greeks had scribes. Right? The Assyrians had scribes. That's how history is passed down. You have scribes, and you also have people that make copies. Right? That's how you do it. So what's the conclusion? The Bible is a document that some parts are as old as 3,500 years old, written at a time when the technology to preserve the documents did not exist. These manuscripts would wear out with use and age due to the elements that existed and the types of materials that they used to record these events. The question should be asked, in the absence of the preservation technology that we have today, how was the Word of God preserved? And the answer is, it was preserved through manuscripts that were put together, copies. I'm not about to read this article right now because the article is, wasted. I pretty much explained everything to you guys already, but this is an article, And this PowerPoint will be uploaded into the classroom. So if you guys want to copy and paste the hyperlink and go read it, you can. But for the sake of time, I'm not, because it's going to retell what I already told you guys, right? You have the history of Julius Caesar. You have the writings of the Odyssey, Homer. Sorry, I drew a blank for a while. In high school, they had us reading a lot of the writings of Homer. I don't know if they still do that. I don't know if they did that for you guys. But in high school, the English class, we had to read the Odyssey and the Iliad and all these things that were written by Homer, right? But the copies that we have of Homer's writings are not the original autographs. They're not. The oldest copies that they have of Homer's writings comes hundreds of years later. Hundreds of years later, copies. We don't have the original autographs at all. Nobody makes a big deal about that because we understand you don't need that. We got the copies. That suffices. Everybody understands these things till it's time to talk about the Bible. So that's what this article is going into. We don't have to read it. We can proceed. So you have the scribal class. Scribe means writer or secretary. That's what it means. And this is from Zondovan's Illustrated Bible Dictionary. Hopefully most of you brothers and sisters, if not all of you guys, have a Zondovan's Compact Bible Dictionary or the Illustrated Dictionary. And you guys can look up the scribe and you guys can read the entry for the scribe. In ancient Israel, the scribal craft was principally confined to certain clans who doubtlessly preserved the trade as a family guild. Right. So in the ancient world, the way things worked, and I believe you can see this like even in early America, whatever the father did, whatever his trade was, that would be passed down to the sons and passed down to the sons. So that craft stayed in the family. Right. That's the way that it worked. So the scribes would be also a Levite recorded priestly assignments during, you know what I'm saying, as well. The Levites would sometimes record things as well. So you had different scribes at different times, right? Even surnames, right? Kind of deviating a bit. What is a surname? A surname would be a hereditary name common to all members of a family and distinct from a given name, right? But I want to come to Webster's dictionary because it gives a better one. Look at this. A surname is an added name derived from your occupation or circumstance. So sometimes, well, let's go in, let's get Bible, right? Real quick. Let's see if it comes up. So, right? So you have two examples of a surnames in the Bible. The name Simon, right? You have Simon, whose surname was Peter. That's the head apostle of Christ. His name was Simon, which means stone. Excuse me, Peter, which means stone. But his surname was Simon. Or I got that backwards. His surname was Peter, but his real name was Simon. Right? His real name was Simon. His nickname was surname was Peter, which means stone. Right? In the book of Acts chapter 10, verse 6, you had somebody called Simon a tanner. His name was Simon, and his nickname or surname was a tanner. That was his occupation. Now, when you go into medieval times, Byzantine time, and the Middle Ages, sometimes your last name was your surname. If your last name is Tanner, sometimes that's because that's what you did. That's what you did. And what would a tanner in the Bible do? Let's get that real quick. What is the occupation of a tanner in Acts 10 in KJV? So this is leatherwork, a person who processes animal hides and skins into leather. So that's what Simon the Tanner did. That's what he did. Everybody got that? That will be your surname. Let's come back to the Bible. So when you're looking at a scribe, so a tanner would be something that would be a surname on you, and that's something that making animal hides into leather, let's say, that would be something that you would do, like your father before you, and that's something that's passed down to your son, and your son passes it down to your son. That's how it went. And some of these surnames followed us even in the Middle Ages. You had your last name is Tanner. Sometimes that really literally is. It's not a slave name. Sometimes your last name is based on a surname of your family. It shows you who your family was and what you guys did. It's a deep history. So the scribal class in Israel was something that was also passed down as well. Just wanted to say that, right? Okay. Enough of that. You guys can read the rest of the definition on your own. Let's look at Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 15. It says, "So I took the chief of your tribes, wise men, and known, and made them heads over you, captains over thousands, and captains over hundreds, and captains over 50s, and captains over 10s." Look at this. "And officers among you." So I wanted to look at this word officers for a second. Officers is the word shatar. Shatar. Now, in the actual Hebrew, it's the word shatarium. This is it right here. Shatarium. These two Hebrew characters here at the end, the Yah and the Ma, or the Yod and the Mem, this makes the word plural. So it was officers that Moses set up, right? So now when the translators translated it into English, you're thinking that these officers was just officers like in the military, the way you had captains and over thousands and hundreds and 50s. No, the word shatar actually means something. And one of the definitions of the word is to write or ascribe. So amongst the people of Israel, when God was speaking to Israel, Moses was transcribing certain things down. And you also had officers or shatar or shatarium that were writing things down as well. Their literal office was to be secretaries. This happened from the inception of our nation. So if you have shatarium, let's go back and look at it. Remember what I just taught you. The suffix, these two letters at the end, makes it plural. If you have shatarium or secretaries or scribes, plural, writing things down, how can you have an original manuscript? If multiple people are writing down the same event, how do you have one original manuscript? You don't. You don't. You have many people writing things down at the same time. That's it. That whole idea of an original manuscript is fake. And even though you had multiple scribes writing things down, you still had to have other scribes that come behind them and make copies of their works, because it was being written on papyrus at the time, and it would translate to parchment, which also you have to make copies of, because that don't last either, as we saw in the Qumran caves, right? We saw that. Let's jump over to Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 28. It says, "Gather unto me all the elders of your tribes and your officers, that I may speak these words in their ears." So what's happening? God is going to speak. So the elders of the tribes and the officers are there to hear what God says. And what are they going to do when God speaks? They're going to write it down. They're going to scribe it. They're going to write it down. So it's multiple people writing these things down. It's the same thing. Who determines the age of these manuscripts? The answer is paleontologists. It's a discipline of science called paleontology, right? It's the scientific study of the life of the geologic past that involves the analysis of plants and of animal fossils. Plants and animal fossils, plants being papyrus, animal fossils being parchment. So how we know how old these parchments that they're finding and these papyruses that they're finding, Who's determining that? Paleontologists are determining that. Right? Okay. Let's look at Numbers 35, verse 1. It says, "And the Lord spake unto Moses in the plains of Moab by Jordan near Jericho, saying, Command the children of Israel that they give unto the Levites of their inheritance of their possessions cities to dwell in." So within each tribe, the Levites would have to be afforded cities to dwell in. "And ye shall give also unto the Levites suburbs for the cities round about them. And the cities shall they have to dwell in, and the suburbs of them shall be for their cattle, and for their goods, and for their beasts. And the suburbs of a city, which ye shall give unto the Levites, shall reach from the wall of the city and outward 1,000 cubits round about." So what are we learning here? The Levites dwelled in all the coast of Israel so that they can execute the office of the priest. In order to execute the office of the priest, what do you need to have? You need to have a copy of the law. This is at the inception of our nation. You already have a need of having more than one copy because the Levites are going to be given cities and suburbs to dwell in amongst all Israel so they could execute their office. You can't execute your office if you don't have the instructions. So from the inception of our nation, we can see the necessity to have more than one copy because they would be all throughout north to south, every tribe, every inheritance. And consider the age, the frequent use, the elements, etc. that would happen. Scribes writing things down and making mistakes. There would constantly need to be people, which is their occupation, making copies from the inception. Because you never know when the Levites are going to call and say, "I need another copy. The one I have is old. The one I have is falling apart. I need another copy." Deuteronomy 17, 18 through 20. Not only did the Levites need copies, but the king would have to make a copy too. The king didn't have an original. He had to make his own copy. Look at what it says, Deuteronomy 17, 18. "And it shall be when he sitteth upon the throne of his kingdom that he shall write him a copy of the law." Copy, not autograph. The king had to have a copy in a book, out of which is before the priest, the Levite. So the king had to make his own copy. I ain't got to read the rest. You guys can read the rest. I just want you guys to see that. Joshua 8:31. "As Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded the children of Israel, as it is written in the book of the law of Moses, an altar of whole stones, over which no man hath lift up any iron. And they offered thereon burnt offerings unto the Lord and sacrificed peace offerings." Look at this, guys. "And he," talking about Joshua, "wrote there upon the stones a copy of the law of Moses." Why didn't Joshua use the original? Why didn't he use the autograph? No, he made a copy, which he wrote in the presence of the children of Israel. Are you guys seeing a pattern? This was never really a real argument. You had people even in the ancient times writing copies, making copies, and using copies. Luke 4:16, New Testament. Was this the original manuscript? Let's find out. "And he," talking about Yahushua, "came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up. And as his custom was, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up to read." Verse 17. "And there was delivered unto him the book of Isaiah, the prophet, the book of the prophet Isaiah, which is Isaiah. And he had opened the book. He found the place where it was written, The Spirit is upon me, because he hath anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor." The question I have is that when Isaiah wrote his autograph, it wasn't in book form. It wasn't in book form. By the time Yahushua came into Nazareth, centuries later, and went into the synagogue, now the book of Isaiah was in book form. Guess what it wasn't? It wasn't the autograph. You know what it was? It was a copy. Did Yahushua look at it and say, this is not the original, I can't use this? No, that's stupid. It was a copy of the scroll. That's why the synagogue was able to have their own personal copy. A synagogue remotely somewhere in Nazareth would not have the original. If anything, if there was an original autograph, it'd be in Jerusalem at the temple. It wouldn't be in Nazareth in some random synagogue. No, the synagogue had a copy. And it was good enough for Yahushua. I just want to show you guys that. This is Acts chapter 8, verse 26 through 30. And the angel of the Lord spake unto Philip, saying, Arise, and go towards the south, and unto the way that goeth down from Jerusalem unto Gaza, which is the desert. And he arose and went. And behold, a man of Ethiopia, and eunuch of great authority under Candace, queen of the Ethiopians, who had the charge of all her treasure, and had come to Jerusalem for to worship, was returning, and sitting in his chariot, reading Isaiah the prophet. Question: was this man of Ethiopia, under the authority of Candace, sitting on his chariot, was he reading the autograph of Isaiah? No, he was reading a copy. Then the Spirit said unto Philip, Go near and join thyself to his chariot. And Philip ran thither to him and heard him read the prophet Isaiah and said, Understandest what thou readest? Was this the original Isaiah scroll, brothers and sisters? I think we all know the answer. The answer is no. Do you see anywhere in the Bible times where people were arguing about whether it was the autograph or whether it was a copy? No, because they understood that that's how it worked. Only dummies today that hate the Bible make stupid arguments like that. Revelation chapter 1, verses 9 through 11, it says, I, John, also am your brother and companion in tribulation and in the kingdom and patience of Hamashiach Yahushua, was in the isle that is called Patmos for the word of God and for the testimony of Jesus Christ. So John was banished to the island of Patmos for teaching the truth. Verse 10, I was in the spirit on the Lord's day, and heard behind me a great voice as of a trumpet, saying, I am Alpha and Omega, the first and the last. And what thou seest, write in a book, and send it to the 7 churches which are in Asia, unto Ephesus, unto Smyrna, unto Pergamos, and unto Thyatira, and unto Sardis, and unto Philadelphia, and unto Laodicea. So what do we see happening right here? All 7 churches had to receive the same message, which means that somebody's getting a copy. Whatever John wrote down originally that he saw, 6 more copies had to be made to be sent to the rest of the churches. So what have we learned so far? You don't tell the age of the Bible or who the authors were by dating the age of the available manuscripts. The available manuscripts are just copies of copies that were transmitted throughout history. That's it. Because the process of preservation of manuscripts didn't start until later on in history. It didn't become a thing. The way that you preserved information was to have scribes make copies of it. That's how it worked. I'm going to skip this thing about the documentary hypothesis. That's not important right now. And the supplementary hypothesis, we'd be here for another couple of hours. By the 1st century, it was common knowledge who wrote the Torah. When you read through the New Testament, John 1:45, John 5:46, John 7:19 through 20, John 8:5, Mark 1:44, Mark 7:10, Mark 10:3 through 5, Luke 5:14, Acts 13:39, Acts 15:5, etc. It's always attributed to Moses. That's the way that they understood it, right? Even though they were reading copies of it. They always attributed what they were reading to being what Moses said. They never had a problem in the New Testament time of reading copies. That's a new argument that has rose up in the earth to try to get people not to believe in the Bible. That's what's happening. Don't fall for the proverbial banana in the tailpipe. By the way, this is an image from Dura Europus. It's called Scenes from the Exodus. It's currently in the Damascus Museum in Syria today. And this is Moses, right? And you see the Egyptians here. This is Moses. The hands coming from the sky is the hands of God. Everybody's brown in the picture. Moses is brown. Look at his garment, look at his face, look at the afro. Then you see the Egyptians who are also painted as being brown, drowning in the Red Sea, etc., right? And here's how it looks in the Dura Europus Museum. Now, some of these images have been whitewashed, absolutely, right? We see that. But here it is in the museum right here. This is one of the better preserved pictures. Okay. I forget who this is. I used to know. I have to go back and look. I believe that's either Joshua or somebody like that. I don't remember. But this is another picture right here. Here you have another melanated picture right here as well. But a lot of the pictures have been whitewashed. That's true. But this is how it looks in the museum today. Still on display today. By the way, this is a great resource. I speak a lot about this. And at some point, I do need to do a PowerPoint and actually go into this book and teach you guys from this book. But if you have a chance to get this book, get this book. It teaches you how you got your KJV. Very interesting history, right? And we're going to end the PowerPoint there. We're going to end today's class there. Again, I pray that the class was edifying and you brothers and sisters learned something. I do appreciate you guys coming every week, as I always say. And yeah, today's class only was about an hour and a half. I don't know why I thought it would take me 2 hours or more to do it. Maybe I rushed, maybe I didn't. I don't know. Yeah, guys. So real quick, since it's 4 minutes until it's an hour and a half. Just a reminder, guys, that well, let me do it this way. So the Passover is coming up. Let me put the regular banner up, not the Academy banner. The Passover is coming up. The meet and greet will be March the 31st. That's the night before Passover. All right. If any of you guys are coming, you have to let us know in the Telegram or email us. If we don't respond to you in the email, then you can let us know in the Telegram. Let us know you're coming so we can tell you guys what the addresses of the place the meet and greet is going to be in the Passover. So the night before, it's going to be food, games, music, performances, fellowship. We're going to have a good time. All praise to the Most High for that. Hopefully some of you guys come. I hope to see some of you guys there to be the Most High's will. And then the very next night on April 1st is going to be Passover at the same address. So you guys make sure that you tap in with us. Let us know you're coming. We'll let you guys know exactly what we need. And the email is going across at the bottom of the screen. It's loigatherings@gmail.com. That's how you let us know that you're coming. All right. Hope to see some of you guys there. It's your brother Priest Daniel, representing Lions of Israel, Maccabees TV. And if it be the Lord's will, I'll see you guys next week in next week's Academy class. All praise to the Most High. Much love to you, brothers and sisters. And with that, I say shalom.